Well, Jennifer Victor is a professor of political science at George Mason University. She joins us also from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for speaking to us on Al Jazeera. What do you make so far of Kamala Harris's presence on the campaign trail? It's just 24 hours after President Biden dropped out. And also, we did see her move on a little bit in that address to the campaign staff there. But there was a point where one might think she was missing out, or there was perhaps a missed opportunity in terms of her setting her own agenda. Do you think she's recovered well enough?
I'm not sure we've seen a campaign transition from one thing to another thing faster than this, what we've observed in the last 24 hours. The campaign has filed the requisite paperwork with the Federal Election Commission in the United States. The branding has changed. The messaging is still largely the same, although I would say very much reinvigorated. And behind the scenes, the party is moving boulders to reform the coalition and in a way that has really excited Democrats and unified them in really swift, surprising fashion. There were many speculations beforehand that if Joe Biden decided to drop out, that there would be some contestation, there would be perhaps some chaos, that many Democrats would want to compete for that position. And would he endorse her or wouldn't he? And how would that all play out? And at the end of the day, not only was Biden's withdrawal timed in a very strategic way, and his announcement of her endorsement all seemed very planned and timely and strategic, but it created the conditions that were right where we saw essentially a decision cascade, starting with sort of the rank and file Democrats up until the sort of more higher ranking Democrats who have fallen in line behind her. So already it's been, practically 24 hours, and we're already seeing her move on to prosecuting the case against Donald Trump, acting like a general election candidate rather than a primary candidate.
We just a short while ago outlined some of the latest polling figures, but of course that was before President Biden said he would step aside from re-election, or at least seeking re-election. And we understand that Kamala Harris is trailing Donald Trump in some key battleground states. We have one poll, CBS YouGov, saying that Donald Trump leading with 51%, while Kamala Harris at 49%. What do you make of these polls? And would you imagine that she, along with the staff, are paying enough attention to them?
Yeah, I would not look at any polls taken before yesterday. We're going to have to wait a few days and the coming weeks to get some new polls. But any poll that was taken before she was the actual nominee does not give us any information about voters' intentions or preferences once she is the presumed nominee. And so, honestly, I take no stock really in those polls from when Biden was the candidate.
All right. We have heard from the Republicans in recent hours and days, and we understand that this is a statement that was made at a rally earlier. That's when, after J.D. Vance had spoken. And I just want to listen back to a bit of what was said earlier. This is what came from that campaign rally earlier.
We are in the fight for the soul of our nation. We are in a fight for our kids and our grandkids, a fight that we can never imagine. I believe wholeheartedly Donald Trump and Butler County's J.D. Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country.
Well, Jennifer, that was Ohio Senate member George Lang speaking, and it is important to note that he has since apologized on social media, saying that he regrets some of the comments he made at that rally. As you heard there, saying that there would be civil war. He said that those comments were divisive. How does this kind of language impact the race?
Yeah, we're in a really remarkable moment right now, unlike I certainly have ever seen in my lifetime, where both of the major political parties in the United States are extremely homogenous and unified, and both of the core of each of those parties are pretty convinced that if the other party wins, it spells some kind of doom for the United States. And that is not a good place for any country, for any democracy to be in. It's a perilous place that is the precursor to all sorts of political violence. Because when people feel like a loss is so detrimental to them that it will result in their loss of livelihood or their loss of life or their essential freedoms or something like that, people are more willing to take to violence themselves. We saw evidence of that on January 6th, 2021. And so being in this particular situation where both parties are fairly united and homogenous internally, and convinced that if the other side wins, that the country is in peril, is a really sort of sad state for American democracy to be in. I do think it's important to note, though, that there is a real difference between not just the rhetoric, but sort of the reality check of the way each side talks about it. On the Republican side, they have a candidate who literally did try to overthrow the last election. He does not believe in the sanctity, the validity, the legitimacy of the electoral process. Believing that you, in the election outcome, only when you're a winner is not the same thing as believing in a democratic election. And so, whereas on the Democratic side, we've seen Democrats, accept losses and so forth. And this is a really crucial difference. So that the claims that each side is making about the consequences of what happens when the other side wins are not based in the same validity or reality.
And that's often used to win voters over. But in this last 24 hours, how have Republicans had to shift their focus? What have they had to do to re-strategize and change their tactics as they now potentially face Kamala Harris?
It's interesting, I have been a bit surprised that Republicans weren't a little bit more prepared for this moment. They seem to be taking a breath or two as they readjust to figure out exactly what their strategy is to contest against this new opponent. I'm surprised that they weren't a little bit more prepared with their messaging or their key talking points or their framing of the opponent of Kamala Harris. Because, by all accounts, a number of people were expecting this. This was not sort of out of nowhere. This has been in the zone of speculation since that debate a couple of weeks ago. And so the fact that they're being caught a little bit flat-footed, that the messaging is a little bit all over the place and they haven't quite settled yet, seems like it's going to take a while. But what we can use to gauge or to think about what we expect about how Republicans will handle this is to look at prior behavior, a prior campaigning experience. And what Donald Trump tends to do with his political opponents is insult them, dehumanize them, demonize them, talk about how they're unqualified or illegitimate in various ways. That goes all the way back to, when Barack Obama was first running for office, Donald Trump was sort of one of the founders of the false movement that was so-called birther movement that suggested that he was an illegitimate candidate. So I don't know what that's going to look like against Kamala Harris. But we can be pretty confident that something in the vein of insulting, delegitimizing, you're not qualified to be here kind of rhetoric is what is probably going to be coming.
All right, Jennifer Victor is a professor of political science at George Mason University. Thanks very much for joining us and for your analysis.
My pleasure.